Hello everyone, thank you for showing some interest in some of the stuff Matt and I do. I hope you all enjoy the sunshine and enjoyed Justin Bieber last night. You all went, I have no doubt, as I didn't. So this talk is about what we're calling faster feedback loops with React Native. It came about because Matt and I have been tinkering with a mobile app. Really, it's a startup on weekends and at night and on lunch breaks and every spare minute we have. And we've really enjoyed it. So let's dive in. My name is Brent Kerr. I'm a lead product manager at BCG Digital Ventures, something you may not have heard of. We're located in the Rocks. We do corporate venturing, helping large companies innovate and create new businesses.
Cool. And I'm Matt Davies. I'm the state delivery manager at Redify. We're basically an application development consultancy that does a whole heap of other stuff like data analytics and design and so on. And we're out there helping companies build applications.
All right. I'm going to start out with a little bit of background and theory on how we sort of think about things. Thanks, Paul. This thing here, I imagine you'll recognize. This is our product feedback loop. Really, it's the heart and soul of what a product manager does. It's a method of finding product market fit, which, as you all know, is required for a product to succeed. Essentially, what this says is you have an idea, you build something, you release it to your market, you measure how well it went in market, and you use what you learn to make decisions about what to build next. And really, it's the most reliable method we have for determining what the right product is for a market. Of course, at the end of the day, this thing is just a fancy way to describe what's nothing more than a conversation. It's a conversation you have with your market. It's a conversation you rely on to make sure you build the right thing when it's needed. And it's quite an interesting conversation if you think about it in that regard. It's one where the other party, which is your market, doesn't actually want to even speak to you. Unless they're really pissed off, and then they really want to speak to you. So you're really limited to sort of asking only yes or no questions, such as, do you like this thing we changed? And often when you get a yes, you have to carefully extract that yes from very noisy data. And if you get a no, often a no comes back as customers or your market simply walking away from you and abandoning your product. So it is a conversation, but it's not one you're typically used to having with people on the street. So given the nature of the conversation, there are lots of limitations on what kinds of questions you can ask. For instance, you can ask for feedback. You can't really ask for feedback on too many features at once, or you might not know what answer goes with what question. And because you need feedback on hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of different things, you need to ask lots and lots of individual discrete questions. Otherwise, your responses get all mixed up in the noise. So this feedback loop is a method of having that conversation where each iteration typically needs to involve asking as few questions as possible, or else you risk kind of getting very noisy data back. And this takes time. It can take lots of time. Even to orbit this loop once, it can really take a lot of energy. So if someone asks you what it takes or when your product is going to succeed in market, you can really tell them the time it takes for me to find product market fit is really the time it takes us to orbit this loop multiplied by the amount of questions you need to ask your market, which is kind of going to depend on how complex your product aims to be. Now, of course, the pace of global innovation and startup successes is accelerating. Our world is moving faster and faster. Users are growing accustomed to products that are adapting quickly to the needs of their users. And so, in some ways, what we've been used to is that you have a value proposition, maybe it's a mobile app, you've got Android and iOS, and the one most people use, Windows Phone, and you use this method, this build, measure, learn loop, to to get the right product out there. And it's sort of been seen as separate from your value proposition. In fact, it absolutely has been seen. It's more like a tool. But in some ways, the speed at which you orbit this build, measure, learn loop has become a part of what you're offering to your customers. They're starting to expect that you're able to evolve with their needs. So they're not just looking for the perfect solution to the problem they have right now. They want to know this solution can be used again in the future. Even if the problems are slightly different or the conditions change, the environment changes, they want to know that your product's going to keep up with that. Otherwise, they'll move to one that's going to move quicker. So the market will measure your product not only on how it works right now, but how fast they perceive it will evolve should conditions change. And so given that, you really have something more like this, where your value prop includes the product you offer plus how well you are able to evolve that given the conditions of the market. So this is how products now are sort of getting measured. You may find it yourself that you download a product or an app or something like that, and it does the job today, and then in a few weeks' time, a few months' time, you abandon this product because it hasn't really kept up with how your needs have changed. So the pace of evolution, of continuous improvement, is now a part of the value prop. So really, the quicker you travel about this loop, the faster you move toward the right product for your market. And remember, not only is product market fit something that's fluid and ever-changing, it's impossible to measure perfectly. And so it's also a destination we can't precisely predict the location of. So if you have a great idea, you don't know exactly what shape your product needs to take before you build it. And really the only way to figure that out, to be certain that your product fits that market, is through trial and error. So the quicker you iterate this loop, the sooner you get your answers, and the sooner you know if you've arrived at product market fit. And this notion is in fact at the very heart of Agile. It's the reason we break down products into smaller parts. It's the reason we employ methods of continuous delivery. It's the reason our MVPs are as small as possible, because the bigger it is, the more inertia it has, the slower it's going to move. And and we know, so all of everything I just described is central to a product manager's job. All right, so we've established how important it is to orbit around this loop. Today we're going to show you how to increase the speed of getting around it for a native mobile app. And we want to do that by letting you see for yourself using an app in the real world. So we're going to use the toy we built on the weekend, on several weekends. This thing is called GetSport. Very unlikely you've heard of it, but this is a mobile app. Matt and I built this all in our spare time. It's the thing we experiment with to try out new technologies, new ways of delivering apps, new product management techniques, new product design techniques, and it's really our playground for all of those things that we're trying to learn. And I think, I shouldn't speak for Matt, but the amount of, I suppose, knowledge and skills that I've been able to polish and fine-tune and apply into my career, into my day job, it's really hard to measure. I find most of what I do apply these days has come from what I've experimented with on the weekends. So whether you have a great idea or not, experimenting and playing around is always something that you'll get a lot of value out of. So what is this thing? It's a mobile app. It helps you organize your sports team. Our broader mission is to make it easier for people to get involved in social sport initially. But right now, it just helps you organize your team that you have in place. So actually, a quick show of hands. Who here actually plays a social sport of some kind, a team sport? 3 people? Come on, you're not all developers. Who else we got? Oh. So 7 people. All right. So and And one last question. Actually, raise your hands again, those people that just put them up over there. Yeah, do any of you do any organizing for this? Yeah, you do some organizing? What's the most frustrating thing about that? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's none of that is actually overly complex. There's just lots and lots of it. You've got to send out your game times. You've got to check who's committed to coming. People back out at the last minute. You've got to find fill-ins when you're short, get the gender balance right for mixed sports. All of these things actually on their own are quite simple. They're small kind of logic decisions. But altogether, it's quite a bit of work. And after a couple of seasons, you've kind of put off doing the organising. So that's the problem space that we decided to play in. And we'd like to take this to a point where you can download this app and even if you're not on a sports team today, you can say, I'd like to be a fill-in, and other teams are looking for them, and they'll match you up, and you can get involved in sport and get a bit more active. The idea came about because I like playing sport, and I don't like treadmills and gyms. And so if I could, I would just, if I felt like working out, I'd just fill in for a team that was looking for it. But that doesn't really exist in any single place right now. So that's what we set out to build. Now that's our big problem domain, but our MVP is a lot smaller and a lot narrower. So right now what we're just trying to take care of is getting fixture data into the system so captains don't have to do it, send out game times to players automatically at the right time, figure out who can make it to the game each week, and deal with commitment uncertainty. That one's a bit ambiguous, but it's more about people, about half or 40% of responses to games are maybes. Is some kind of maybe they'll attend the next game. And dealing with that is 80% of what the captain has to deal with. So if we can take care of that, we take a lot of load off captains. Okay, so that's the MVP, and I'll leave it now to Matt to talk about some of the tech underneath that.
Cool. So you'll see up here, I've just put a few of the logos of a few of the different tools and platforms that we use, but we've got a fair bit of technology that we've come together to put into this app, and it's taken us a little while to get there. A lot of these tools are free. A lot of them we use the free versions of, but we've found a whole heap of different value in all sorts of things. So you'll see Slack up the top left. Everything that we do is in Slack. Every time we push a build, every time someone gives us feedback or needs support, anytime anything happens in any of our code, all of that feeds through to Slack. So we use that very much as like a central hub for everything that's going on, and that's really, really useful from a communication perspective, and something that's helped us a lot as we've hired a part-time developer to come on board and help us as well. We've got Fabric.io, which you might have heard of. It used to be owned by Twitter. It's basically, amongst other things, a crash reporting framework. We use Firebase, the free version of Firebase, for doing our push notifications. So there's a whole heap of different technology here, but what we really want to talk about today is very much these, three in the middle here. So the one on the very far right here being React Native. I'll touch on that a fair bit more in a little bit. The middle one is, again, something you might have heard about if you're doing mobile application automated deployment, something called fast lane tools. Well worth looking into if you haven't. I'm not going to go into that today, but obviously I'll be around for questions afterwards, so feel free to come and ask me about that. And the one on the left is called Code Push. The one that we're using is called Microsoft Code Push. There are a bunch of different things that kind of do the same thing, but that's the main technology that we're using. So if I move on, I guess I thought it was worth, for at least some people in the room, giving you a little bit of context on some of the history behind why React Native. So when the current generation of mobile platforms came out, iPhones in the very early days, Steve Jobs himself was actually fundamentally opposed to the idea of apps on his platform as well. He thought, they're going to introduce viruses, they're going to lead to our platform getting contaminated and slowed down. He actually just didn't want them full stop. So the official guidance from Apple was make web apps. Just make the same web applications that you're already making, but try to slim them down into a format that works well on our mobile devices. And look, that was okay. You had really, really high distribution of your apps. It was really easy to make changes, instant to make changes in a lot of cases. You could leverage all your existing web skills. But time and time again, people kept slamming against a couple of big problems, which were A, performance, so being able to navigate around your application in a quick way, being able to do things that required very fast responsiveness, and in particular as well, like really fought that problem of accessing native device frameworks. So when people needed to get to things like the camera in the early days, that was very, very difficult. If you needed to access native components of the device SDKs, nearly impossible. So that's kind of where we started. And obviously from there, we all kind of know the history. Apple started up the App Store, Android followed along with their own very similar model not long after that. That gave us amazing performance. Like, you were running applications on the device itself, everything was very responsive. You didn't have access to a lot of SDKs, a lot of utility functions in the early days, but that improved over time. And so this became basically how everyone was targeting apps for these devices. You got free promotion in the App Store, and in particularly in the early days when there weren't a million fart applications out there on the store. That was absolutely brilliant. You had so much promotion. You were nearly always in the top list if you came up with a good app. So really, really cool, and that definitely changed the game. The problem that we found, and the problem that we found in I guess a whole heap of different cases, particularly me from a background of building apps constantly, is you now had this problem where you had to build 2 different applications, 3 if you're talking about Windows Phone as well, in every single case. So the overload from having to do that, you'd have to maintain potentially multiple development teams with very specialized skill sets. It's expensive. It's still hard to find people who are very, very good in those skill sets. So people started trying to come up with, okay, what's a middle ground? How do we take some of these wins and combine them with some of those wins and come up with something that fits both boxes? So we ended up with hybrid applications. So you might know these as Cordova or PhoneGap applications. Basically, this was do the web app exactly as you would, but wrap it in some kind of shell or some kind of container so that you could put that out across multiple devices, so that you could access the hardware, so that you could try and at least get access to some of those native things that you can't really touch just from a web app. So they were quite cool. Again, pretty easy to build, just web skills, shared a lot of those characteristics, but we still struggle with that performance problem, and that's something that only really in the last, I'd say, very recent few years have we started to do anything about. So the solution that as a whole and largely development community and people building these apps came up with was a form of hybrid technology that, instead of just wrapping a web app, actually turned itself into a fully native app. So the 2 common ones that we touch all the time is Xamarin and obviously React Native, which I'm going to talk about today. So React Native it really came along and really in the last year has, I think, really changed the game for how a lot of this stuff works. The development experience is totally different to anything we're used to. You can type some code on your laptop, and I'll try and show this later, and just watch it live update native elements in an application that's connected to your laptop. It's pretty amazing. The experience for deployment is brilliant, which is what we'll kind of cover in a little bit more depth in a bit, but you still have access to the App Store, you still can take that promotion method if you want, and you still have very close to fully native performance. I still wouldn't use it for building a game, for example, but you really have access to very, very fast performance, which is obviously incredibly useful and important for a lot of apps. So I won't dive into this in too much detail because obviously we've got a mixed audience, but essentially React Native has 2 big buckets of things to think about. You have the native side of the application. This is where you're deploying actual native code onto devices. So this is things like the code that accesses your camera, for example. What React Native gives you as well out of the box is some code that acts as a bit of a bridge. Now, over in our JavaScript world, that's what we're putting together. We're building a JavaScript application using React.js, talking through that bridge to control the native side. And that's at a high level how that architecture works. The real power, I think, from this is that in a traditional application deployment model, we'd deploy a native application out to devices, we'd deploy it out through the App Store, we'd go through our normal review, And then we'd do that all over again, potentially a few days later, once we'd figure out some more changes. So that's what that normally looks like when you deploy a full application. You're deploying a black box. It's got some native code inside it. In the React Native world, what we also add is that bridge and some specific React Native components as well. Now, on top of that, what we can do is use some technology to allow us to update that JavaScript application, which I showed in the last slide. So we can change anything in our application, assuming that there's already some native code in there that we're trying to control. So we can push as many of these JavaScript application updates on top of this as we want, and we're quite happy as long as we don't need to change any actual native code that's bundled in. So to try and make that a little bit clearer, I've got this diagram here. Basically, for a native application, you've got a number of different components in a part of it in React Native. You've got some components that, for example, control the UI, allow you to put in new lists onto the application or new action sheets, for example, anything like that. Might have some code to control the camera, push notifications, do your animation, anything like that. And if you want to change that type of code that's interfacing directly with the operating system, you've always got to do a full deployment. There's no way around that. It's just kind of part of Apple's rules. If you don't, though, you can push these instruction blocks in JavaScript whenever you want, at any point, instantly, to change how that native code is controlled. And that's basically at a high level how all this stuff comes together and where we start getting some real power. So that might pose a question to some of you of, how does that work from a compatibility perspective? So if we need to sometimes change native code, but then some other times we can just change our JavaScript application, how do we make sure that that all ties together and actually works? Well, we start by deploying, let's say, 1.0. That's our full deployment to the App Store. And then we can do some code push updates on top of that to change existing API code that we've already deployed. That's all well and good. But then we realize, we need to make some change that uses new native code. We need to, let's say, access the camera because we need to take some photos of people playing their sport games to show on the team page, let's say. So we push a full release to the store. It's called that 2.0 that contains that camera interface code. On top of that, we can then push as many JavaScript changes as we like to change how that's controlled. So we might want to add cameras into just about every screen into the app. And each time we do that, we can add another code push on top. And that's how we keep compatibility. From that point that we do 2.0, at least the way that Brent and I have it set up, we no longer touch that old one path. You can, if you like, continue pushing minor changes to that, but that's only really valuable for that few days period that it takes you to get a review. So you can take that or leave that. And that's basically how we keep that level of compatibility. So with that, I'm going to not talk anymore and jump across to my laptop and get set up, and I'll get Brent to take you through what we're going to demo to you tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. This is quite exciting because basically I get to put a developer on the spot whose screen you'll watch, and he's going to try and code something. So if you want to participate in this, if you want to actually see and experience this update to your app come through without going through the app stores, you can download GetSport, you can sign up. It is a bit of a disclaimer, it is pretty useless for you if you're not playing on a social sports team. So be aware of that, but it's an MVP. We're not necessarily targeting you guys as yet if you're not playing on a sports team, but if you are, you might find it valuable. Right. So you can download that and figure it out. I know a bunch you already have. We get all these things popping up. Just a little further on our disclaimer, what we're about to do next, where we're about to actually code something and push it out, and you guys can see that happen on your device. We just want to let you know this is all real. This isn't something that's not slide decked, or we haven't preloaded the app up with this code. So Matt's going to actually do this, and it's not on a testing environment or anything. So it's in production. This is native. This isn't a phone gap type of app that you're using or a web browser wrapped in an app of any kind. We're releasing it to real users, so we haven't actually segmented this audience or anything like that. So real people are going to get it. We're going to try and capture some real feedback. There is a pattern in there that hopefully you'll see, and you'll be able to send some feedback, and it pops up in Slack, and I'll show Slack for you, and you can see your feedback come in. And of course, be aware that it'll be posted up on here. So if you have very terrible things to say, I'll still put it up there. And finally, one final disclaimer. This is, as I said, is real, so expect things not to exactly go to plan. All right, so to help make sure you guys feel this thing is legit, let's figure out what we're going to actually build. So Matt and I narrowed this down to 3 things that at least Matt felt confident he'd be able to get built while we're sitting here before our time's up. These are our 3 stories. So what I'll do, I'll quickly show these in our backlog that I've got up here and filtered. Let's load that up. It's all nice and filtered, so you can't really, hang on, I gotta learn to scroll. So we've got just 3 stories that I've labeled. We use Trello for everything. We have one board for our entire process, from design through to user stories and backlog, through to what the guys are working on, when it's ready to test, when it's done, and a bunch of other things that are sometimes useful. So these are 3 stories that we decided to write. They are, I've just lost my mouse. Okay, so as a user, I want to see the number of consecutive games I played, so I know when I'm on a playing streak. We don't have any, we're not surfacing any statistics inside the app about how you play sport right now, so we thought it would be a good time for us to dabble in that. So this one is saying consecutive games I've played. So every time a new game pops up, each week, if you play one game per week, you'll just get that one game a week. And how many times you responded and said you would play that game, you committed to playing, and then the game time rocked around, and how many consecutive weeks that event occurred. Quick look at the acceptance criteria. Actually, you know what? I won't do that now because I'll come back to that. I just realized Matt wants his time to actually code this thing. So the stories are, and you guys can vote, the stories are, I want to see, this is number 2 is the one you just saw, see the number of consecutive games I've played. Number 1 is I want to see the total number of games I've played throughout my entire record with GetSport. And the third one is I want to see the number of consecutive games that I've responded to so that I know how committed I am to the team. A lot of people don't respond to fixtures or events or game times. They ignore it. And this lets people start to see, start to build up a streak, a bit like the Snapchat streak, to I guess, encourage them not to give up that streak. So they responded the last 2 or 3 weeks, they want to keep that thing going. These are all hypotheses. We haven't really gone out and done any research to validate them. We think they're small enough to validate by building and releasing. So story 1, I want to see the total number of games I've played. That's pretty straightforward. Story 2 is I want to see the number of consecutive games I've played. And story 3, the number of consecutive games I've responded to show that at least I'm telling the captain if I can make it. So what I'll do is I'm going to quickly do a vote, really simple vote, which is a show of hands vote. If you just to randomize it a little bit, but who wants number 1 to be built? Just put your hand up. Cool. Number 2? 3? Oh, 3 gets it. That's the one we didn't want. Great. Awesome. Damn, I thought I could lead the group with number 1 being simpler. Too bad, Matt. Okay, so number 3 is what we're going to try and do, which is, as a user, I want to see the number of consecutive games I've responded to. Well, I like this one. This is the one where it lets you keep track of your commitment to the team. So I asked Matt before we started about these 3 things. He said best case scenario is he'll get them done in 20 minutes. But I'm a product manager, so he has 10 minutes. And yeah, that clock started, buddy. So while Matt's working on that, if you want to... by the way, we're going to put Matt's screen up over here so you can see how real or not it actually is. Matt, close all those questionable tabs you often have open. While Matt's doing that, you feel free to see what he's doing. I'm going to just talk a bit more about exactly what shortcut we're taking here, but with this code push technology. So firstly, this build, measure, learn loop that I talked about before is definitely an oversimplification of every version of this kind of thing. Yeah, you're going to see a ton of stuff up there, and if you've got any questions about what you're seeing, like with Proto or anything, just we'll try and talk about that too. So this thing here, build, measure, learn, it's boring, it's oversimplification. The actual cycle that you might go through looks a little bit more like this. Instead of 3 parts, you kind of have a lot more parts. So really you have an idea, that's where it starts from. You figure out what your success metrics are, you prioritize it on the backlog, you design something, then you go away and you build it for Android in a normal native process, you build it for iOS in another native process using, I always get the language wrong, Objective-C in one, Java in the other. Then of course you build for Windows Phone, and then you go off and test it. Then you release it to the Play Store, release it to the Apple Store, and what else we got? Then you've got to encourage your users to update. So if they don't have auto updates on, you've got to give them a reason to go and bother doing that. Then you want to measure how well that thing went. Then you want to draw conclusions on what you learned from what you measured. That's a lot closer, at least, to the cycle that we experience when we've been creating direct and native apps. Now, where the bottlenecks in that are, if I highlight these ones, now there's bottlenecks in all of them. You can actually increase the speed around this loop in lots and lots of ways. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if a whole lot of you out here actually had a bunch of ideas and on how to improve some of these other things, and I really would like to hear them. So come up to me afterwards. But we're going to talk about these ones in red. Sorry, mate. Yeah. Yeah.
On that left screen was before when in the Chrome browser, and there's a tool when you were using the simulator and it has a bunch of screens. What tool is that?
Which was that? Proto. Oh, cool. Yeah. So, all right. I could talk about that now, I guess, Matt, and then I can come back to this. Proto is this thing here. It's a website you go to. It's a web app. It's called proto.io. It's the thing I've used myself to actually do all the design for it, do all the UX and do all the graphic design and do all the animations and transitions. So it's a wireframing tool, but it lets you actually do full UI and design stuff. So it looks a bit like Photoshop in here, but...
So that wasn't actually simulated, it was just a UI?
Yeah, so that was this. Is that what you saw?
Yeah.
This here? Yeah, so this is Proto. So what I do when I design it is I go to Trello here and I write a story and I write down the acceptance criteria, I write down the tests, the automated tests that Matt will put in place, and then we're able to check that this thing hasn't failed when we build something else later. We figure out what our success metrics might be. Once I've got that down, I go and design it, and all I do is I come into Proto and I create the section or the new element, and I actually design it straight in there. And then I sort of screenshot it and send it off to Trello.
So have you used any other tools before this to design UIs?
No, I use pen and paper to figure out maybe a wireframe or two.
I'm just wondering how good it is compared to things like Adobe Illustrator.
Yeah. So a little disclaimer, I'm not a designer. I'm not a UXer, and I'm definitely not a graphic designer. But I designed 99% of this app, and I did it using Proto. So I don't have any training in that area. And Matt can attest to many of the versions you won't see in the app today, how absolutely terrible they were. But Proto lets you, does transitions and animations and all those things really, really easily. And what we found is the importance of those transitions are so high that if we try and design it in a wireframing tool and then move it over to like static screens and then try to articulate what the transitions need to be, we actually lose a lot of the end-to-end experience when we were doing that. I at least found that for myself. I really struggle to use multiple tools to do this. So this lets me do it all in one place. Yeah.
How do you get from the transitions into code from Proto?
Matt. Yeah.
Does Proto give you...
No, it doesn't do any code for you, if that's what you're asking.
Show the animations?
Yeah, so this is the editor.
How do you replicate that?
He just looks at it. Yeah. So the actual process is something like I created in here and I cut out maybe the portion that we're going to do. So this is where the area we're going to design that story in. And I'll stick it in Trello. He'll come over here, and if I've added a new modal or something or a new transition, he'll look at it in Proto, and I'll try and do it exactly how I intended it to be in Proto first. But what actually happens is he sits down next to me, and we have a bunch of devices, and we have a bunch of emulators, and we just go through, and he basically says, is this right? Is this right? Is this right? And thanks to React Native, he can actually, I think it's thanks to React Native, right? He can actually make changes very, very, very quickly, and all the devices change, a bit like using Chrome developer tools to do front end, and you see it change in real time. But you see native stuff changing in real time is really cool. So a lot of our conversations are simply one pixel more, too far. And then that's really how the requirements get to map. Yeah.
So just a quick one on Proto, so I totally buy what you're saying around the animation thing, that's important. Did you compare this to Sketch?
Yeah, so I found the learning curve in Sketch. Being someone who's not a designer, I did give Sketch a go at first. And at BCG DV, we use Sketch a lot. But I found that without training and a background in that, I didn't really have time to go through that learning curve to get everything I wanted out of it. So that's sort of how I measure apps we use. I actually assess learning curve very heavily. I weight it a lot. So we've given a lot of different things a go. We had Sketch. We actually had a designer. We hired someone in the early days to do wireframes and full-on design. And then we tried just wireframing, pen and paper, and then trying Matt would actually build it natively straight off the paper, and he'd sit with me and go, what color do you want here? That didn't work at all. And then we found Proto, and quite liked it. It fits well for us. Each to your own. Whatever you're quickest in, whatever you enjoy the most, is what I recommend. But I found this was easy to do transitions, a lot of stuff out of the box. You can go back and basically, you can get your spinners going and your snack bars and stuff. And we found it quite good, very quick to do a lot of things. So we actually tried another thing where we skipped Trello, which is our backlog. We tried doing just this and then tagging elements with comments and saying, Matt, do them in this order. And that would be everything, UX, design, and backlog. It got lost a bit quick, and we abandoned that idea. But we gave it a go. Let's see if it works for a few stories. I don't get commission or anything if you guys use these products. Should have put a bloody commission link up. Yeah. So Proto is the tool we used to do all that in.
And you work in different cities, right?
Yeah, so I work from Sydney and Matt works from Perth. I used to live in Perth, but we do it all remotely. Design it in Proto, pop it into a story in here, write down the AC and the tests and success metric. Are you done?
So actually, as of just then, yep.
Okay.
So what I've done there for you guys who are watching on this screen is basically made the change to the application itself. I was just using data that's already provided as a part of the API. And I've released that as a code push update to our test application. So if you have a look over here on Brent's screen, we're using something called test object. It's basically an application that lets you simulate an app on a number of different devices. They actually use a whole heap of real devices, so it's kind of cool. And we've already pre-installed our test application on here. So what we're going to do once we get that loaded up is apply our code push on top of the application that's already deployed to test object, have a look at it, make sure that it all makes sense and works properly. And if it does, we'll get Brent to deploy that out to all of your phones in production. This is all assuming it works.
You didn't update Trello.
And we'll move that straight from backlog to ready to test.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I know that Trello is doing what it usually does. Okay, let's come back here. Right, so this is, the app's already open. I'll log in with my usual test account. So this is a test version, I think, is it?
Yeah,
Yep,
right.
great. I don't have to check that. And I'll use a mobile number. Now, we're not going to send an SMS in our test. So this is our staging app, deployed to test object, 96615. Right. Sorry, I do have to sign up. Okay, so that'll log me in, and all right, sure. Okay, so I think it's already got the update, Matt. We just update our header to tell us that there's, we make it red if there is a new version, a new code push that just got downloaded and installed and now requires a restart. So we just go home and we find our app, might be over here. GS test is our staging version. Okay, cool. So this thing up here is only in the test version. It just tells us what's going on when we look at our staging app. So both of us have two apps on our phones. We have GetSport, which is production, and GS test, which is our staging one. So I'm trying to sign something off. I can't remember what it is. Let's take a look. I want to see the number of consecutive games I've responded to. All right. I don't know how many. Well, we haven't tested this. I don't know what the API is going to return. But if I open this up, okay, response streak 2. Firstly, I do my job, and I open up my design, and I can do it in Proto, and I check that he actually followed the acceptance criteria. Yep, it's pretty good, Matt. It's pretty good. Has he got I can't see it clearly. Has he got rounded corners on this? I had rounded corners. So, font size to Matt. This guy here says font size is too small. So, I know how to fix that. We just put this back here. and what we do, we comment and go, helpful person in front row says, you got it wrong. Font size too small, bro. And we send that, and we sit back and chill until Matt fixes his thing. Yeah, you can imagine when we're in opposite sides of the country, how these jokes get lost. They're not perceived as jokes sometimes. And, yeah. So I was kind of okay with the font size actually. So just. And I couldn't be bothered, to be honest. Yeah, it looks okay to me. Actually, the acceptance criteria does say this font size has to be the same as this font size, and this font size has to be the same as this font size. It looks about right from my eye, but the number of times developers haven't read the full acceptance criteria is hard. Oh, not you, Matt. No. I won't check all these opacities and things, but to me that looks okay. Now, the one thing I can't check here too easily, and it will take me too long to do that test, is the API returning the right number? So this was a number of consecutive games I've responded to is a 2. Let's see if, I really don't know if this is going to tell us. These are a bunch of fake teams. Actually, they're real teams, but fake users on them, because all the data is actually real. So I haven't responded to that. You know what? It'd take me too long to find. Yeah, true. True. Okay, so good work, Matt. I'm okay with the font size. I'm sorry. We'll get that fixed for you. So I move that to done. What am I doing next? Oh yeah, I get to deploy this, don't I? Awesome. So I go over here to Team City. Team City is cool. So you can tell by my understanding of this how much trust I put in Matt for a lot of it. But Team City gives me the power to deploy that thing that Matt just did all the way to production, which is all the way to your phones. So I'm happy with that. Let's take a look. GetSport, React, Android, deploy hot push production. Let's see what's in there. add response streak information to the main menu. Okay, let's run that. So that's Android. That's going out to production in Android. And GetSport React iOS hot push prod. If I press this button here or this button here, it creates a new binary and automatically deploys it all the way through to the app stores. It does all the stuff that Apple needs you to do to get a binary in there, and we've used it a number of times and it gets approved pretty much every time, I think. Unless it totally crashes on launch, which only happens every second time. So, yeah. So I think they're going. I pushed the button, Matt. Did I do something wrong? Maybe I need to refresh. Could be the internet. Blame everything else. All right. So if you here we go. There we go. It's deploying. Yeah.
Is that a script behind it?
Yeah, that's right. So what we're using here is Microsoft's Code Push. So that's just a library that you put into React Native itself. That library knows how to go out and fetch those updates, look if they're there, fetch the ones that are actually compatible with the binary you're using, and it knows how to teach the app how to apply those once it actually restarts. So all that's a library we use out of the box, and they give you some APIs that you can just submit your basically just your JavaScript application to, and it takes it from there.
Okay. So.
That's called, so Apple uses something called Fastlane tools. So essentially, without like going too far into it, essentially it's some scripts that people have written that interface directly with the App Store via the web page. And there's a huge number of different things. It can basically like provision your certificates for you automatically, do all your provisioning profiles, all the stuff that's normally like a big pain that can automate for you. And one of the big things that we're using is that automatic deployment out to the actual submission process. And that's quite easy to use. It's all written in Ruby. It just runs on a Mac build server that we've got running. So,
thanks, Jeremy. I agree. It's sick. So that's deployed now. If your app should do some things. I hope it does some things. You might see a little bar at the bottom pop up with a spinner saying updating the app. Forgot what the actual phrase is. Updating GetSport to the latest.
We totally wrote this app. We know what it says.
Yeah, we know what it says. There is no count showing. Oh, cool. We got a bug report. Who is that? Is that someone over there? Yeah. So how many consecutive games have you played? If it's 0, then does it actually good question? Does it say 0 or does it has nothing? Well, quick! I know what to do. Bam! And then I have a label, red means bug. So
I think the audience is trolling us in a sec.
So fantastic. So there is a bug. Oh. Is there a bug, Matt? Matt, there probably is.
Just for another 40 seconds while I deploy the API that actually gives the app that data.
Oh yeah, the TeamCity?
10-minute time?
Oh, the timer, yeah. I've got an ally over here.
Who is this guy?
He's telling you your time's up, you're fired.
So if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, so you see we've got their Play Now API. It's what we used to call the app. We still honestly haven't really decided on a final name for the app. And that's our back-end API, which is just automatically just deployed out to Azure.
Yeah. So will the people who have no number there, will it just change?
You should magically get a number in a few seconds, which is very exciting.
Oh yeah, I've got the same bug too. Reproducible. So that'll should update in a second. All right, to finish up, really what you saw, I'm just a bit lost, give me a sec. So what really happened there? Well, you know, this is sort of the cycle you go through. These are the bottlenecks, build for the 2 platforms, release it to the 2 stores and encourage users to update. What we've really done is basically this, using React Native, build for both. We tested it in test object. Our testing was so poor that bugs still made it all the way out. Sort of, not really. Your API
Yeah.
wasn't ready, but testing should have picked that up. We released... Sorry, showing 0? Well done, Matt. Sorry, what's that?
Initially, when you had a new update, it said we restart to...
Yeah, that's a good question. There's the restart after the code push did its thing. After the code push came down and the bar popped up at the bottom and said updating app, now you have to restart.
Yeah, so it did
Yeah.
that, and then there was no 0, and then I just...
Then 0 appeared?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think I can
So-
answer this one. So there's 2 questions there. One is, why did you have to restart? And 2, how did the 0 magically
There you
appear? The 0 is easy. It's always checking the API. And so when the API updated, it eventually just sent an answer out and said, here's your 0 until then. Yeah. The other reason you had to update, and Matt's better at explaining this,
You can try.
but I'll try. Thanks.
You're welcome.
You have a few options on how you have the latest code push installed onto your device, how your app starts to take on that new code push. You can force everyone as soon as it downloads it to actually update and your phone kind of flashes and it's got the latest version. You can require someone to just background it and return, which is what we do at the moment. So we don't have that flashing thing that might return you to the home screen or something. And the third one is you can do it on a cold start, which means you kill it out of the background or turn your phone off and back on the first time the app's loading, so it's not in the background, and it'll install or load the latest version of the code push. I think they're the 3 iterations.
Dead on. Yep.
Yeah. So just finally, that's the shortcut we take around our loop. You can find lots of other ways to optimize this and get stuff in front of users and get results. I did have Slack. It's fixed. Cool. Want a beer? That's not really feedback, but yes. I think that's about it. So we've talked a little bit about the tech, and
Yeah, cool. So
controversy. Who likes controversy, Matt? Why don't you talk about that?
No one likes controversy? No. Okay. So there's been a lot of talk in the last week in particular about Apple clamping down on this type of thing, deploying live updates straight out to devices. So what actually triggered that is a framework called rollout.io, I think it was. And what those guys came up with is a way to do this for native applications. So forget React Native, a way to do this for purely native apps. And what they were doing is still using JavaScript, but using that to actually change the native code itself, which is something that React Native explicitly doesn't do. And of course, they're changing the native code itself. Apple's like, no, you can't do that. And so everyone changing that, using that framework basically started getting their apps rejected. So if you have a look at the actual term, and obviously I do this because I have nothing better to do, except as set forth in the following paragraph, an app can't download or install executable code, which is what Rollout was doing. You can only use interpreted code if you package all that interpreted code with the app itself, except if you use Apple's built-in JavaScript core to run those scripts and code, which is what React Native does, provided that you don't change the primary purpose of the app. So what that's essentially saying is you're fine to use JavaScript to change how you're sending commands to native code, how you're changing, how you're using those commands from the diagram I had up earlier, but you can't actually change the native code itself, and you can't use this exception here to change the purpose of your app. So obviously you can't change it into a completely different app. You'd probably get into trouble for that. So that's basically what you're looking at there. And I'm sure we'll get questions on that at the end. The other thing that I thought is probably worth mentioning is React Native as a technology, would we actually go out and use this for our customers in real live production apps at the moment? I've personally recommended my own company that we stay away from that for a little while, just based on Brent's experience and my experience with using it. But in the last, I think it's in the last 2 months or so, React Native actually changed their release process so that they're releasing every month instead of every couple of weeks. And that actually really helps the stability of this as a technology that we can go out and use in customers. What we found, especially in the early, I guess, like 6 months of building this, is that the whole community ecosystem would change every couple of weeks as certain people panicked to update their plugins, other people rolled behind trying to update their plugins to keep up with things. And so it was really hard to keep a stable app that was actually up to date using all the latest technologies. With the change in how they've slowed down the release process, I actually genuinely believe this is something we can go out and use right now, not just in startups, but in real life production apps, because it is a very powerful technology.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Hasn't Instagram built their app and React Native?
I don't know if Instagram has. I know Facebook obviously, having driven this technology, have. I'm not sure if Instagram has.
So listed on the React Native page, so I imagine they had to get around when it passes the hybrid.
Yeah, with React Native, the entire app naturally pulls React Native into an existing native app. And then slowly
Right, yep. Yeah.
Is it possible to speed test? So send some.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can do that in one of two ways. A lot of the code push frameworks themselves, the tools themselves, will allow you to send a percentage out to two different sides or three different groups or whatever, and they'll figure out that split yourself. The way that we've always worked out how we're doing it is basically controlling it with feature toggles in our API. If you've come across those before, basically the API telling the app, yes, you can or can't show this feature. So there's a couple of different approaches, but the fact that you can push out updates out very quickly out to devices is the really important part, because there's plenty of different ways already to do that A/B testing.
Could you then maybe send an update to a select group of users and then trial and then with the idea of
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And you can do things like rollback changes as well. If it turns out they're not effective, you can just pull that update out using the tools. So yeah, really powerful. Particularly.
We talked about that for this group.
Yeah.